This is Christoph Baumann. Thank you so much for coming. I think we should say Grüezi. I'm very happy that we have a tie at the conference. Probably the most important one. When Gerrit and I spoke and he told me about your work, I said, wow, this man needs to come to our conference. I think 2 hours later, you already were confirmed. So that is the spontaneity, the kind of reaction we love, because that's what we need. Otherwise, there's no change going to come. Tell us a little bit about your role at the Swiss government, and maybe also your personal background, how you got there.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And on your point on speed, we need to act fast in sustainable finance. I think it's absolutely adamant. There's a huge dynamic and we need to be ahead of the curve. So in my role as envoy for sustainable finance at the Swiss State Secretariat for International Finance, I'm the...
Sorry, what is the department?
So it's the State Secretariat for International Finance. So it's the financial diplomacy arm of the Swiss government. And in my role there, I'm leading the Swiss negotiation on sustainable finance in all the multilateral bodies, all the bodies you would probably say that aren't acting fast enough. There's very difficult discussions in there, obviously, like the G20 or the International Platform Sustainable Finance. But I'm also in charge of the overall strategy of the government on sustainable finance, so including all the domestic regulatory work.
And how much of the course is like nature, energy, food, emission reduction? Like, how do you focus your time?
I would say there's quite a focus on climate and biodiversity, or climate and nature itself. And the reason for that is just those are the two fundamental crises, and they're very much interlinked and reinforcing each other. And all the other SDGs depend heavily on us solving these two crises. And the second reason why such a focus makes sense for financial diplomacy is because these crises, there's a consensus that there's also macroprudential risk for the financial sector. So it's not just about doing good, it's actually a huge risk that's hidden currently to some degree, and for the economy and for the financial markets to address as well.
Since this risk is for everyone, is it perceived as an urgent risk? We had invited 521 sustainability officers and nobody came. Is this because I didn't do aggressive marketing? Did we have the wrong speakers? Or maybe there are too many other conferences. I don't know. But my suspicion is we don't have the normal logos people look for, right? If you look at announcements at COP, there's a logo party. Oh, wow, business for nature. Actually, Eva has been very good to us and did many introductions. But it seems to me that in order to be part of the game, you need to show who else is there. And they want to see, maybe it's an all or nothing type of situation.
I would say that there's not yet enough awareness of the importance of technology to solve these climate and biodiversity crises. So I would assume that NOAH conference will have a more difficult time addressing the traditional players. Otherwise, we actually engage very frequently with all the relevant stakeholders, both from the business and the NGO and university side, and we see a lot of ambition and also awareness of the urgency, but the awareness for technology could be way bigger than it is, and that's part of my job to also change that.
Right. It's interesting because every sector got disrupted through entrepreneurs and new ideas, but politics, and let's call it nature conservation, seems to be philanthropic, governmental. I don't think the corporates are really involved, because if you study their LinkedIn posts, I analyzed 18,000, the word forest for sustainability officers appeared 39 times. The word proud, 800 times. So they seem to do good, but they don't talk about it. Maybe it's because of greenwashing. But let's go back to the tech. So what data initiatives are you part of, and how can the Data Alliance help?
So there are various very important initiatives going on that improve the data availability. And one, obviously, is Switzerland 2 weeks ago made the climate disclosures based on Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures mandatory across larger corporations across the economy. And what we did there when doing this, this ordinance is we imposed the mandate to make electronic disclosure, so in a machine-readable format. Yes. Because we really want to trigger innovation based on this data for the financial market, but also for fintechs and tech companies. related in the nature phase, the nature-related financial disclosure as a working group is super important, and we see a huge dynamic internationally for it. Switzerland's been supporting it from the start. A third one, and that's actually the one I'm most excited about, next to obviously the Nature Disclosure Alliance. The third one is the Net Zero Data Public Utility. So it's an initiative that started between Switzerland, France, and Bloomberg. We now got also the UK, Singapore, and European Commission, and all the big data providers in the world on board to build a public, free of charge, without IP data repository on carbon emissions of corporates and financial institutions and their targets, so to really improve the accessibility. Another key initiative is the Swiss Green FinTech Network we established together with Green FinTechs in Switzerland, together with incubators, accelerators, and consultancy firms and universities, where a main part of the work is how to improve transparency of what all the data sources are available for FinTechs to build up their sources, and also how can they improve the data availability.
Okay, that's quite a lot, huh?
There's quite a lot going, but there's also quite a need. I think there's quite a consensus that in many areas of ESG, data is still not of adequate quality.
So this NFTC, I forgot.
Net Zero Data Public Utility.
No, the first one.
The TCFD or TNFD.
They are supposed to include biodiversity footprint data into the public disclosures.
Yeah.
How do they do that? What data tool do they use?
So
because I read their PDFs. It's painful to force yourself through these long documents of blah, 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 blah. They don't say, how are we counting our animals on a local level? They don't talk about tools, they don't talk about cloud, they don't talk about data delivery, they don't talk about standards, they only talk about the conceptual need of include biodiversity data. But whenever you try to speak to someone there about, okay, how? What we know the biodiversity is dying. You know, they shot 10 million elephants in my lifetime in Africa. We have 280,000 left. We have a human-wildlife conflict. We have poaching. We have bushmeat. I mean, there's so much going on. But they write PDFs constantly. We downloaded 30 million PDFs. 30 million. So
I would strongly oppose the view that what TNFD is doing is blah, blah, blah. It's very strongly. I think there's the world's leading biodiversity scientists are trying to find ways, what is a good disclosure for a company?
You know that IUCN, who has invented...
Yeah, but let me quickly finish on that. So I think it's still a building up fast. They're publishing their metrics in a couple of months, and the whole thing will be published next year. So it's still a development phase, but it's really a very, very clever initiative and a very important one, because we need to have a consensus what corporates should report and what policymakers such as myself should ask corporates to report. There needs to be a standard, which is, it's PDFs. It's like, what should they report? And then the question is, which is a very valid one you make, is what can we do with the data? How can we improve that data that comes from there? But we need first to have a consensus, what should they report? What are the common metrics in each realm of biodiversity?
Sorry for interrupting you earlier. I feel a bit passionate about this. Yeah. So IUCN, which I'm sure you know, an organization with 180 million funding, and it's like the #1 animal supporting organization. They created the concept of the green list. They realized, the protected area is 17% of the world, and as we know, they try to get 30% by 2030, and we know they're mostly paper parks. So they invented the concept of the green list. In 10 years, they couldn't agree on the KPIs. In 10 years. So I'm telling you, if they can't agree in 10 years on the KPIs, will they ever decide on what company, what startup is collecting what data? These discussions cannot be done without the involvement of startups. The people who collect actually the data, they report in their concepts and their frameworks. It has to be real. How expensive it is to put sensors in the Brazilian forest. It's 765 million hectares. One device costs like $1 per hectare. If you're getting the cost down to 20 cents. These are the discussions I don't see. And I'm asking you now, are these happening maybe behind closed doors? Because our startups, they did not receive one single call. Cyber Tracker, Rainforest Connection, Nature Metrics, they're doing quite well on the political side. But you cannot do biodiversity data without speaking to the people who actually provide the tools. So I would strongly encourage.
I absolutely agree with you,
Yeah.
but that's happening. That discussion is happening in TNFD. There couldn't be a more collaborative process they're doing. So they're engaging with lots of stakeholders, including lots of startups and data providers on how improve the data.
So we just got the wrong companies here.
And you cannot expect to get a call actively from them. You need to engage with them.
Me,
No, but as a startup as well.
which is used for 30 years to collect data.
So you can be part of the TNFD forum, you can engage in these processes, and I think it's a very collaborative effort there. And I do believe a lot of discussions on that front are happening as well. But I mean, I'm not TNFD, so I cannot speak.
No, I'm just interested. But you're
but I
much
think
closer.
it's a very collaborative effort. I couldn't find, or from my position, it's difficult to find a more collaborative effort that's going on than what they're doing now. Will it make sense what they're doing? Is it practical also afterwards? Will it be adopted? Those are the big questions that are still up for grabs.
I'm not convinced at all. But anyway, that's just my personal opinion. I just tell you one thing. You need the scientists, the politicians, the corporates, if they don't spend time with the tool provider, they cannot finish their concepts. They cannot finish the numbers. I mean, there are companies like RepRisk here in Zurich doing a great job on disclosure, like the other ways through NGOs. But I miss the dialogue with startups. And I don't want to give you a hard time on stage.
No, not at all. I'm just saying that conversation is going on. And if it doesn't convince you, me saying that, I cannot change that, obviously. But I think there's a lot of discussions with actually the data providers and the startups in that TNFD framework. Will it produce something useful? I don't know. We will have to see. They will report.
Sounds like Vera digitization, which was announced a year ago, and they still have not even come out with any type of framework. It takes 4 years to carbon credits in this world.
Again, the people and the policy makers behind TNFD, they put a lot of, or the dynamics behind TNFD is amazing. It's very similar to what TCFD achieved, and TCFD is now globally adopted. It's not yet perfectly comparable, but what the International Sustainability Standards Board is doing based on TCFD will be. And the same, I hope, will then happen on the TNFD side as well.
Maybe
I'm cautiously optimistic, actually.
Maybe one of these organizations will actually make Apple provide their emission data, which is still not public. They don't report. There's also no global land registry database where you can see, oh, they took this rainforest. You cannot get access to land rights. In fact, in Botswana, you're not even allowed to count animals and bring the data out of the country. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely.
And please don't be demotivated.
I'm
I'm just a conference organizer and trying to get some answers.
Very far from being demotivated. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you.